There's no question that the era of Western predominance is drawing to an end. It has been measurably since the 1970s. I say the 1970s because it's then that Chinese economic reforms begin. And from 1979 onwards, the gap in economic living standards between the United States and China begins to narrow. In 1978-79, the average American was 22 times richer than the average Chinese. Today, it's more like 4 times. So that's a dramatic reduction in the gap between American and Chinese living standards. And that has occurred in my lifetime, in my adult lifetime. That is the big story. You could call it the Great Reconvergence, but it's not just a Chinese story. It's also an Indian story. It's generally an Asian story. And if you look further afield, we see convergence also between North and South America. So I think this means, just in narrow economic terms, that it is no longer an American world or a Western world in the way that it was for most of the 20th century, even in only narrowly economic terms. More broadly, I think Western predominance is ending politically and culturally too. One doesn't have the same sense that one had in the 1970s, that popular culture was essentially made in America and everybody else just had to suck it up. Actually, the striking thing when one travels the world today is the extent to which there has been cultural diversification. Why is that? I think there are 2 reasons. Number one, the rest of the world has downloaded the killer applications that made Western civilization successful. They have essentially been able to copy the things that originated in the West, but are now becoming universal. Those 6 things, ranging from competition through to the work ethic, are no longer monopolized by people like me and white guys from the Northern Hemisphere. We don't have that monopoly anymore. Actually, to take just the example of the work ethic, Chinese people probably work quite a bit harder than Americans now. Certainly, judging by my experience with students at Harvard and Stanford, they work quite a lot harder. But there's another process at work which I think is just as important, and that is the deterioration of institutions in the West. Even as Asian and Latin American countries are improving their institutions, and also some African countries, Western societies are suffering from what I call the great degeneration, a process in which their institutions are getting worse, measurably getting worse. I mean, I pick out 4 examples in my book, The Great Degeneration. I point out that public finance in most European countries and the United States has become a great fraud on young people and the unborn, transferring resources from them to the elderly population. I point out that there's a problem of chronic overcomplexity and regulation, which is strangling economic development. I point out that the rule of law is no longer what it used to be and has become the rule of lawyers, which is something different and much less efficient. And finally, I noticed that civil society, all those voluntary associations that used to make the United States and parts of Europe so distinctive, that too is in decay, in decline. So I think it's not just that the rest of the world got the killer applications. There's a sense in which the operating system of Western civilization itself has suffered a kind of corrosion. And so it's those 2 processes that are ending Western predominance. By the way, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think on the whole, it's great that the rest of the world, which after all is much more numerous than Northern Europe and North America, is catching up. And I'm glad that it's happening. But we should be aware of it. And people in the West should not simply sit back and accept that their institutions are inevitably decaying. We need to clean up those institutions, upgrade the operating system, and reboot Western civilization. I think that's really rather urgent.